Yesterday, there were some great conversations both about everyday encounters, just the reality of what both kids and officers experience on the ground when they engage one another. And we spent a lot of time yesterday on really focusing on how kids process that, how it impacts kids, how it makes kids feel, and how that impacts their interactions and with the police. Today we're going to start out with how those same encounters, how those same everyday encounters, how police experience them. We have a great panel to kick that off. Just a couple of logistical things that I wanted to do before I turn it over to Steve Edwards to kick off that panel. First and foremost, there are some folks who've been talked about without being named throughout this conference. Our Youth Police Project, a team of students and a team of folks, journalists, and who've been working with the high school kids for the last number of years. And I just want to at least give a shout out by name because they've done the real work behind this conference. And it starts, of course, with the leader in the Invisible Institute, Jamie Calvin, the director of the Youth Police Project, Chaselyn Hunt, who you all met yesterday on the panel. Rajiv Sinclair, also Invisible Institute, Elise Blennerhart, and some awesome students. And two of the students you've been seeing a lot holding mics coming back and forth, Jackie Scotch Marmo and Joe Maychew. And there have been a host of other law students who have worked on the project over the years as well. You also see and meet, there's a retired attorney who's been volunteering his time, Emmett House, Rachel Steinbeck, another attorney. All these folks have been volunteering their time working with kids and really putting this all together. And of course, Andrew Miller, a graduate student in sociology, and finally, an undergrad who sadly can't be here today. She's in California, who's been working with us, 3 years, Ava Ben Ezra. All right, yes. Oh, and my favorite person who's holding the camera right now from Invisible Institute, Patricia Evans, who's been with us from the very, very beginning. Apologize, Pat. All right, a couple logistical things, and then we'll just get right going. There are note cards, and hopefully folks got note cards as you checked in today. As I mentioned when we started this yesterday, I love the conversation, but we don't want to leave here without really a way forward of where do we go from here, ideas about what to do, what can be done to improve the situations, both from police and youth side. And so with that notion, a couple of things. Everyone's been given note cards, and we're going to have a closing session that focuses on that. And one of the things that will facilitate that session will be you writing down your thoughts, your ideas, reflections about where we go from here and turning them back into the reception desk, and that will be accounted for to help facilitate that final conversation. There's also an easel just outside this room with a flip chart that you can write in markers too, just to write ideas on, and we'll be using that as a part of the final panel. Aaron's reminders to me, please cell phones off. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at #YouthPolice. And last but not least, there's a lunch today, and if you registered, you should have gotten a ticket. Everyone who's registered should have a lunch ticket to use that ticket for a box lunch that will be after our second panel of the day. Am I missing anything, Aaron? Okay, without further ado, let me give it back to Steve to kick off our next panel. Steve Edwards.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Craig. Who here is tired? I mean, it's Saturday morning. It's 9:15. It's cold. It's rainy. We need to get the energy going in this room a little bit. So I want to invite everyone here to not be the least bit shy about engaging with our questions and comments today. This is a really pivotal part of the conversation, as Craig mentioned, as we spent yesterday hearing a lot from the voices of youth and how they view the relationship and the youth-police dichotomy. Today we're going to have an opportunity to hear what life is like from the police perspective and also get police insights into how this relationship can change. And we are delighted to have a terrific group of panelists with us to shed some insight on that. Microphones are in the back for those of you who want to ask questions and make comments. We ask that when you do so, you keep those brief and to the point so we can get to as many of you as possible. We'll start here on stage to get some ideas in play before we move things out to the rest of you. But without further ado, please allow me to welcome to this stage here Jane Castor, who's the Chief of Police of the Tampa Bay Police Department, Marq Claxton, a former officer with the New York Police Department and now with the Black Law Enforcement Alliance, Richard McAdams, the Bernard D. Meltzer Professor of Law and Aaron Director of Research at the University of Chicago Law School, and Howard Saffold, the Executive Director of Positive Anti-Crime Thrust and a former Chicago police officer. Give them a warm round of applause. So I'm going to come around the podium and maybe make my way down there. But Howard, you were here yesterday. And as we actually set everything up, let me remind everyone, turn on your microphones if you haven't already. Make sure that the lever is on. You were here yesterday listening to the conversation, listening to the voices of youth in the videos. As somebody who's been working on these issues for a long time, as a former officer, what was going through your mind? What's your reaction to what we heard yesterday?
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Yesterday was deja vu for me. I think as we go into this discussion today, I'll be very specific about what has happened here in Chicago. I'm a part of a national group called the National Black Police Association. We're in 22 states, 35 major metropolitan areas. What I heard yesterday was two questions that never really got answered. One was from a mother who described herself as an educated parent. And the other was from a youngster. The mother's question was, we talking about what the police are doing, who are they doing it for, was her question. Never got answered. And I'm sure the time constraints precluded that from being answered. The second question was a statement question. And the individual said that it appears to me that this is all economically based, he said. And what do you think about that, was his question. So I kind of hung there for the sake of today's discussion, because I thought those two particular questions are very relevant to anything that you may talk about doing in this interim and any future plans that you may have. So now if you want me to go further, I will. Otherwise, I'm fighting a cold. I'm going to be sparing with my words, but
we need you.
I have a bunch of them.
Well, let me just stay. Let's take that first of those two questions for a second. And I'd love to get other thoughts on this. So in terms of policing, who are we doing it for? Mm-hmm. What would be your answer to that?
The first thought that came to me was the police in America, not just in Chicago, are generally the harbinger, the early warning system of when the justice system is being tried. They're the only ones in our society that have the control over the quality of life in terms of being able to make a split-second decision where courts have to convene for a while before they death sentence you. A question of who are they doing it for really boils down to what community you're talking about, because the mission changes. Unfortunately, the mission changes in terms of how the police do what they do, when they do what they do, and why they do what they do. And it differs. I've worked all over the city of Chicago in white, black, Latino communities, and there is a double standard in terms of how the police perform, and again, depending on their mission. Here in Chicago, specialized units have been put in the equation where a normal routine beat officer answering calls for domestic services, runaway child, a litany of things we do. But guys on a special mission have a tendency to undo police-community relations with their tactics, with their mindset, and with the driven charge, leaving the station or leaving roll call that says, we got quotas on certain things. We're going to produce some arrests. We're going to get some drugs. We're going to get a confidential informant, on and on and on and on. So I think
they're moving in and out of neighborhoods and communities.
They're moving in and sometimes unsupervised, sometimes uncontrollable. Some district commanders can't speak to a specialized unit without getting to the head of that unit, who sometimes nobody knows who he is until they're doing an investigation on what this guy's mission is. So it gets rather complicated, but the question opened up a can of inquiry that says, let's get more specific when we're asking who are the police working for and whose behalf. Sometimes it's for the bosses that put them out there, and sometimes it's for the community that need them. And sometimes those things conflict. So that's my initial response to that question.
I want to stay with these questions, but I also want to get an insight. We heard how some youth view the relationship with police. I'm also interested in getting a perspective from the reverse. And from your perspective, Chief, what are the realities of life like for officers on a daily basis in large cities across the country?
Well, first I would like to follow up on what Howard said, because that is very important. And we have in my organization, we basically changed the way that we police 12 years ago. And we had, as I like to say, specialized ourselves into a corner. Everybody had a specialty that they did. And now we have gone to the decentralization, and in each of our cities broken into 3 districts, and all of our resources are in those districts. And the officers are expected to know the citizens they serve, know the community, know what the crime problems are, and know what the standards are in that neighborhood. Just like you said, every neighborhood is different, and you have to get with the community and find out what they want the police department to do. Police officers, we think we know everything, and what we need to save you from are rapists, robbers, and murderers. And that's true, but there's very few people that are victims of those types of crime in the big picture. And when we first started, when we talked to the community, really what everybody wanted was not to have their stuff stolen. I don't want somebody to take my car, break into my house, beat down robberies, those types of things. So we focused on what the community wanted from us, to enforce the standards of that neighborhood. And it is very important for the officers to know that that is who they work for, are the citizens in that particular neighborhood. Now, there are a lot of things that are unusual about law enforcement. I've been in it for 31 years. Law enforcement is the most visible arm of the government. We represent everything that is right and everything that is wrong with government. And a lot of times the frustrations that are taken out on law enforcement, for example, with Ferguson, that's much bigger than the Michael Brown incident. There's a lot more to that situation. I'm sure we could all agree. But police officers get into the business of law enforcement to save lives. And that's one of the things that whenever I talk to college groups or young kids, that police officers are here to provide a service to the community and to protect the community. Really, as sappy as it may sound, we get in it to serve and protect. Nobody raises their right hand and takes an oath of office to go out and take someone's life, or that's the most devastating thing that an officer could be involved in. And one of the stories I told at the dinner last night, I always say, and if anybody has any relatives that are firefighters, I love firefighters, I say everybody loves firefighters. They can show up late, the whole house burns down, and everybody's like, well, y'all tried. Let me go bake you an apple pie now. And what happens when police officers show up? We show up when things are at their worst. And when we make a decision, we usually irritate half the people that we're dealing with. And so we understand that, but to be a police officer, I have never in 31 years met a police officer that didn't come into this line of work to do anything other than serve and protect the community. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that people don't get jaded through the years in their career in some cases, and we do everything we can to stop that and to avoid that. But that's what police officers are here to do.
Well,
Can I jump
please,
in
and then
on
I'm going
that?
to go back to that. But yeah, go ahead, Mark.
And I hope this thing is on.
Yeah.
But although I agree that for the most, it sounds good to say that police officers come into it, and your experience has been that all of the police officers that you met came into this thing for these, altruistic and honest and integrity-filled reasons and rationales. But that can't possibly be the reality or the fact of it. I think, and I believe in my 20 years experience at NYPD and my subsequent experience in having communication with departments across the nation and individuals, I think we have to, part of what law enforcement must do and policing must do is be honest that within the ranks themselves are some hideous and heinous people that need to be challenged, need to be identified, and need to be eliminated from law enforcement. No profession has a 100% integrity rate within it. We hope that that is the case, but these cases, and some of them are well known nationally, and you mentioned Mike Brown and Ferguson, these things don't occur with these things, generally speaking, will not occur with a 100% integrity and honesty rate of those individuals in that profession. So part of what we have to fight and part of what needs to be done is for us to stop, and as police, being defensive and acknowledging that there are some huge systemic, ingrained problems within the profession. There has been a decrease in the professional standards, and there are individuals within the ranks that have no business being police officers, street sweepers, door catchers, or anything else. Until we get to that point of acknowledging that there is poison in it, unless we get there, we'll always have this assumption, and I don't want people to assume that this is such a proud and honorable profession and these people came in for this reason, because far too many individuals don't come in for those reasons. And what happens is the manifestation of that is the Ferguson, is the Baltimore incident, is what's happened in Staten Island and New York. I mean, those guys may or may not have come in, but not everyone comes in with those honest and integrity feelings.
Can I ask, what are some of the obstacles? So this, no one is saying this is the only
I want to make sure that, just check to
solution.
make sure that your microphone is
I
on.
think it's on.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So I'm just curious, what are the obstacles to getting rid of officers who show themselves to be unfit to be officers?
The union.
That could be part of it, but I think the first step is acknowledging that what has happened in law enforcement over a 30-year period or something longer has been the steady decline of professional standards.
In what way?
Accepting much less from individuals. I'll give you a perfect example. Just the other day, a couple nights ago, there was a police professional explaining in Baltimore some of the circumstances that led up to this particular Freddie Gray being chased, if you will. And on national television, this police professional said, they didn't need probable cause to make that arrest. Now that's just stupidity. But this is an individual who is a spokesperson for a professional police organization. That's just a recent example. But there are individuals who now, and especially given the many departments, there are departments and individuals in those departments that are winging it, who don't have a full understanding of law, who don't have a respect of the Constitution, who don't have a connection to community, and they are really winging it. And you'll notice it when they have to explain why things happen, and you'll sit back and your head will snap back and say, what did that chief say? Mm-hmm. If you remember the comments from Ferguson, from the police chief down there, I mean, at some point it becomes an embarrassment. It should become embarrassment. Yeah, it becomes an embarrassment if you maintain a certain professional expectation. I expect my police chief, like you, to be brilliant, to be smart, to be knowledgeable, to be understand. I demand that. And if you're anything less than that, we can't just act as if it's okay, because that idiotic behavior, that idiotic language that we heard in Ferguson, that we heard the other day in Baltimore, that we'll hear other places, those are red flags saying, your standards are really low now. Because the fact is, not everybody could be the police or
Right,
should
but
be the
you
police.
can't use one statement and say that,
No,
that the standards, professional standards, my experience is over my 31-year career, that the standards, the expectations in law enforcement have risen dramatically.
All right, then you have to. Then there has to be some understanding, rationalization of Mike Brown, of Sean Bell, of an Amadou Diallo. There has to be some. If you're saying that the standards, I mean, there are
Right,
there are
but you're saying,
improvements,
okay,
but-
you're picking maybe 5 or 10. My department handles 640,000 calls for service on average a year.
Mm-hmm.
And the only ones that anybody pays any attention to are the ones where there are issues with that you can pull out of there. But to say that as a whole, law enforcement standards have decreased because of 4 or 5 instances, that's just my organization. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of police officers
I want to do 2 things here, though, if I may. I'd actually like to, if it's not professional standards, what do you think is going on? I'd like to get the other panelists here. And then I want to move to something else, too, not to at all minimize the Fergusons, because these are critical. But I think what we heard yesterday also is it's not just that, it's the everyday interactions, right? It's that everyday sense of trust. It's the idea that when you ask young people in this city and many other cities, particularly youth of color, if they would call the police, there's that pause that we all saw in many of those videos yesterday, this sense of trust. And I think that's also a critical piece of this. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. What's driving that sense of mistrust around everyday interactions?
First of all, the discussion we're having has a systemic history way beyond your career.
Right.
I'm beyond your career. I go back to the Panthers in this town, when it was revealed in much later years there was a conspiracy between the police, state's attorney, and FBI. That's something that we have to talk about when we talk about the credibility of a local police department, unless you're now disconnected from the state's attorney and the FBI. I want to mention 4 words that kind of drives the conversation for the question for me. And I have to keep my cheat sheet in big letters because I'm getting a little older. Brute force, which is the use of deadly force and that can cause great bodily harm or permanent injury. Corruption, nepotism, and racism. Hold on to those 4 words for the sake of integrity if we're trying to talk to young people who are going to be part of government at some point. Some that we heard yesterday may be discouraged forever from ever even wanting to be a police officer, yet they were bold enough to go into our military services. So my point is, I don't want to argue the back and forth about how do we prove what we're talking about. Your own data tells you. Every time you investigate your own crime, you get your outcome based on what you want. The Office of Professional Standards that was created here as a result of I don't know how well known the scandal was in New York, but it produced a guy by the name of Serpico. There was a scandal there about corruption within the police department that actually split good and bad, evil and good, and etc. I think we're on that page today. And whether we want to act as if this cancer is not metastasizing is on us. For the decent guy, if it's the majority like you say, speak out against the bad guy. Don't let me have to keep asking you who is he and why does he still exist. That's one of the challenges.
So this trust
Let me
issue
say
goes
these words
to history,
again. Brute force, corruption, nepotism, and racism exist in all of the police departments in the country. The smaller they are, the greater chance they have of addressing this, because they got a constituency that keeps making demands. When you get into a big conglomerate like New York, Chicago, LA, and other cities of that size, Philadelphia, the challenge is a little bit greater with those 4. How do you get to the bottom of nepotism? How does and we're in a training academy. We know who the thief is, who the alcoholic is. I'm talking about within our ranks now. We find that out when we're in school. Here's a guy that can't shoot on the range. They've been teaching us nonviolent techniques for controlling a person without beating them with a stick forever. What happened to it? Well, when you look at the size of some of these police officers, they ain't ready to fight nobody. They can't do much more than shoot.
What is the relationship between lack of internal accountability and
well, what
trust?
it does, let me speak about the nepotism side. If I'm in the academy with a guy who's got a clout, you know what clout is. Sponsor. And he's incompetent or she's incompetent. I know it. He knows it. Everybody in the squad knows it. But he seems to get taken out of the heat, either by way of settlements, things of that nature. And the rest of us now kind of say, how does he do that? And before you know it, the majority of us are either becoming silent or trying to figure out how to be a part of the clout club. And that promotes corruption, nepotism, racism, and distrust. Distrust is when honesty prevails over dishonesty. Simple as that. Consistency over inconsistency about the truth. So I think as long as somebody just said, as long as we're in denial about having that cancer within our midst, we're going to have a problem with the public trust, period.
Yeah. Richard, you've done a lot of work on the broader areas of procedural justice and are familiar with the questions around police legitimacy. What role do those kinds of things play in this conversation?
So there's a literature that I'm sure you are all somewhat aware of, maybe very aware of, which is, but the audience might not be, which just says that the public will view the police or the government in general as being more legitimate if they feel like they're treated fairly and with respect by the main institutions of interaction, which are the police and the courts. And then beyond that, if they feel greater legitimacy, if they perceive greater legitimacy in these institutions, that they're more likely to obey the law, or as we were talking yesterday, more likely to cooperate with law enforcement, to be willing to call the police and cooperate as a witness with the police when it's necessary. So that there's some advantage in, I think this goes back to the idea of having people who are always policing the same community and thus have a stake in building the kind of trust where they're perceived as someone who can be trusted by the citizens, meaning if you go up and talk to them, you're going to be treated with respect and fairness. And then, that kind of policing then would tend to get more community support, whereas when people come from outside, they have no reservoir of trust built up, so they have nothing to lean on except, as it turns out, force.
Yeah. I know the chief is working on those kinds of training regimens to bring that about, but Marq, from your perspective, why don't we see more of that?
More community-based initiatives?
Well, more of the kinds of encounters that are collaborative, that are cooperative, especially with youth. We heard a lot of youth yesterday say that they are routinely stopped on a regular basis, and the presumption is that they're up to something criminal, that there's not a lot of effort to build a relationship with youth in the community, that it's a very adversarial kind of interaction.
Because first off, the youth realize what's going on, and they understand quite clearly that the police, government, is not really looking to build relationships.
Yeah.
That is, that's a PR stunt in many ways. For example, here in Chicago, I don't know, a couple years ago, they decided to decentralize CAPS, the community assistance, the program. They decentralized it. I just got triggered when you said decentralized, because I always say when you decentralize, you're talking about defunding and trying to make that relationship defunct. So you commit acts overtly, and you have no real focus or commitment to being friends with the community. You take money away from those initiatives, and most importantly, your conduct makes it clear to the communities, those impacted and affected communities, that we can't be friends. I am your target.
But why is that the reality for in many cases? What's going on inside the police department, inside the mind of an officer?
Let
me let Marq, and then I'll jump back to you, Howard. Yeah.
You left something out of the equation.
And what has occurred is that there has been a shift in the paradigm of law enforcement throughout the nation, shifting away from community-based and involved initiatives and programs, more towards heavy-handed enforcement, numbers-driven, quota-driven policing. And with that, you no longer need a particular police officer who possesses a certain skill set. I couldn't survive if I lacked the ability to communicate effectively if I lacked compassion and humanity. I couldn't effectively survive in the police department environment under, the community policing model. But I can thrive in this heavy-handed enforcement, lock them up, quota. When you ask a question about how crime is, they'll tell you, well, crime's excellent because we had X amount of an increase in arrests. Well, that doesn't answer the question. But in that environment, which is the environment we're living under right now, which is heavy-handed, arrest-driven, quota-driven, militarized, that is what the police has become or devolved into. And that's part of what I was saying or trying to reference when I talk about the decrease in professional standards. You no longer have to be good. Knuckleheads can get on now and thrive in this environment because it's about...
Because of the incentive structure, because of
Right.
what's being expected,
Right.
what the public as a whole, what
There is
mayors are asking.
There's an incentive, it's
Our
incentivized. It's incentivized to be disconnected from a community. I can't stop and smack up 150 people that I'm gonna face on a regular basis unless I'm really disconnected from the people. I can't be brutal every day of my policing career, and there are officers like that, not the majority, but there are individuals who are like that, who are much more physical and hands-on, who are obnoxious, who don't know how to speak to people. I can't be that in a community policing model because I come out there every day. But in this militarized, heavy-handed model, I could do that every day because then it's incentivized because I can get promoted. I can get a special assignment. I'm part of the clique. I got a hook. We call it a hook in New York. What you call the clout is a hook in New York. So I could do these things. I could be supported in my career. I can actually excel in my career. And then I could do like you did here in Chicago with Gary McCarthy. I can leave New York from doing it, go to Jersey, do it, and then come to Chicago and do it.
You wanted to say something, Howard.
The professor, you left out one major part of the equation, police courts, but you didn't mention corrections. That's recidivism. That's what we're talking about. Where do youngsters get their history from? Some families, 3 generations, have been victimized by wrongful convictions, numerous convictions, repeat offenders. What happens in the prisons that have anything to do with what happens on the street? If you're studying it, you'll realize that there's a place called prison now that when I started, there were about 8 prisons in the state of Illinois. We're over almost 40. And the age group for going in and the gender has changed. So police demands have changed. But the young people who are viewing this, they can look at it from a historical perspective. If they have an academic background, they'll see it one way. It's like that little joke you said, we need to lighten up. I told Craig, I don't want to be on no panels because we can't drill deep enough on panels. Time constraints require us to not stay on an issue until we got too many. But that old joke about the American breakfast, bacon and eggs, and the hen is a contributor, and the pig is committed. I'm committed. I'm tired of being studied. I feel like a cadaver because I've watched it build into prison industries, okay? So if we're going to talk about the police role, we have to talk about how he or she in that area of responsibility is connected to a court system that could be corrupt. I mean, we had some stuff here recently. Everybody's wondering, how the hell did that happen? Well, a policeman shoots a lady in the back of the head, make a $5 million settlement with the family, and no trial. Okay, so when I say things like nepotism, when I say things like corruption, don't disconnect that from the prison system, because we have people that run prisons who appoint executives who point people to those boards, and the people go to prison. The people in the prison, running the prison, end up in prison. How does that happen without corruption? So I'm saying, when we're going to get honest about the discussion and keep those 3 connected, because it is a system.
Can I say something real quick? Because I take great exception to what you're saying. And frankly, I just think it's insightful to throw that blanket over all of law enforcement. The community could not we could not be in the position we are in America with the freedoms that we enjoy if we didn't have law enforcement in the community. And to say that every police officer is heavy-handed, and you say, well, there are a few exceptions.
No.
I think it's the other way
Majority
around.
are the
The majority.
What we're
Right.
overlooking,
And
with all
that's-
due respect, Chief,
Right.
you take an exception
please
with
let her
the
finish.
world, who now have you on stage in terms of democracy. You're on the world stage, and you're being judged by public opinion worldwide. So this conversation that we're having is not to say, are we hiding corruption? Are we catering to it? Are we excusing it? It's we that don't speak out. It's the chief who says, just don't do me like that. That's not all of my cops. Well, show me how you got rid of the one I first told you about, because he's generational now. He was a police officer, became a lawyer, then became a judge, and might even be an elected official with that same mindset that never got corrected and is now more corrupted.
You're talking about
And it's
internal
instituted.
accountability inside the
Internal
department.
accountability, period.
And we have that.
Let me let the chief talk
Right,
about
and we have that. Last year, our organization has 1,000 officers, and I fired 6 of those individuals, and it's very difficult to do that. The problem, too, is that, and it's one of the things I tell all of my officers when I swear them in, I say that the day that you raise your arm and you take that oath, to a degree, you have lost your individuality. Because now you represent 1,000 other men and women that wear that uniform, and your actions had better reflect positively. Because one person, and that's the reality too, public opinion, if you look at all of the surveys and research on public opinion, if a physician does something and kills a patient, public opinion of physicians in the medical profession stays very high. They say that person shouldn't be a doctor. If you look at public perception of law enforcement, it looks like an EKG chart. A police officer gets killed, everybody loves police officers. Something happens, a police officer does something inappropriate, every officer in the nation pays for it. So I've been in this for 31 years, and I tell you, the majority of the police officers are good out there serving the community, and the bad ones are rooted out. It's just difficult to do sometimes because of the protections.
I don't want to leave this conversation entirely. I just want to foreshadow the next conversation we're going to have is going to be a deep dive on these very questions, all about accountability inside police departments. What's the reality? What are the consequences, the ramifications all the way around? I want to come back, though, to you, Chief, because we also heard yesterday that, you know, in many of the communities that are feeling the disproportionate impacts of the kind of issues that we're hearing from youth, it was also pointed out that these are also, in some cases, communities that are wanting more law enforcement. And my question, I guess, to you would be, how do you effectively keep communities safe, keep guns and criminal activity off the streets without alienating people? How do you do that?
Well, another thing that I talk to my officers about is that we derive our power and our authority through community trust. If the citizens don't trust that their police department is doing the right thing, then they're in essence ineffective. And what you said about the crime rates, I believe is true. If your crime is coming down but your arrests aren't coming down, then you're not successful. It's only when the arrests are also, and although we have a reduction in crime this year, our arrests are down by 17%. And the relationship that you have to build is based on communication, and the community has to feel comfortable questioning the police department. They have to feel comfortable coming to you and saying, why did you do this? Why did the officer do that? Complaining about what officers do. If you don't have that kind of relationship in a neighborhood, then you're going to be ineffective. And I agree, the larger an organization, the more difficult that is to do.
I want to get some questions here, and I'll come back with my follow-up on that. Yes, I think you wanted to ask a question yesterday, and I cut the time, so let me make sure you get in today.
I think it's on. Hello? Is that working better?
Yes.
Okay, my name is David Zarnecki. I'm an attorney here in the city. I know the city of Chicago uses the use of force continuum. That's the same use of force continuum I learned when I was in the military. It's 2 pages long on a sheet of paper. And there's no difference between how they treat children, how they treat mentally disabled. It's the same thing for any sort of contact that they make with a subject. And it's the subject that they make contact with. And I don't know how they do threat assessment, but if they're using that continuum, I'm assuming that they're using the same threat assessment I was taught in the military. So when a police officer interacts with a child and they're using a military mindset of threat assessment and how I use my force and everything else, how does that not instill inside the police officer an idea of fear and paranoia of that person, and then using force in order to enforce the law the way they see fit, as opposed to the officer approaching the situation with courage and concern for the other that's inside the room. When the police officer took on the shield and the officer took on the duty and responsibility to police the community and put himself at risk of criminal activity. So I'm just wondering what your perspective is on that in general inside the city, and how is there any way to better inform officers or train them on how to interact with youth other than just like saying, here's this blunt instrument?
No, well, that's a little myopic. The use of force continuum is something that basically is provided for officers so that the absolute minimum use in every situation is looked upon. But that is, I mean, you're taking that use of force continuum. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of information that an officer has to digest on every single call. We can, as you look now, our policies, and procedures are thicker than a phone book. And to say that an officer uses the same amount of force on an 8-year-old as they do a 30-year-old or an 80-year-old, every single situation is different. All of our officers are trained in how to deal with the mentally ill. All of our officers, officers are probably the most trained profession in the nation, because we're expected to handle everything from A to Z, everything in society that nobody else really wants to. If you look at jails now, they are the de facto mental health facilities, and officers are the mental health practitioners out on the street. Individuals under the influence of a variety of kinds of drugs. So I think that's just a little myopic to say that.
I'll let you sit and I'll have a follow-up, yeah.
And I think I understand the point in regards to use of force continuum, and he's right, is that there should be some amendment and modifications to that very generic and broad-based use of force continuum. There is no consideration built into the way the use of force continuum is treated now, currently. There's no difference in 20, 30 years ago when I received my training on use of force continuum. There is, and a lot of times what you'll find, and you can't escape this, that there are cases that we all know about where you have to question who threw the use of force continuum out the window. Basically, the use of force continuum is, if you use this amount of force, I'm authorized to use that amount of force. If you escalate it, I can escalate it. That's what, in essence, what it is for those people who don't understand it. But there are so many cases that we can't ignore that say that, and this is what I'm talking about, the lowering of professional standards. You could point to those cases and go, they didn't apply it.
Chicago has a unique situation, and if you're talking about Chicago,
can I finish one more? Just
yes,
one more
sir.
Before I forget this.
Because I forget what I want to correct. Go right ahead.
No, go ahead.
No. The question was a very significant question when we speak in terms of what escalates from verbal abuse.
Yes. How do these go
from
wrong?
verbal abuse to raising my voice, to cussing you, to pushing you in a provocative way, and then disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and battery. Those are the holy trinity that follow the misuse of verbal abuse. Most police departments, most of them, I don't know about yours, they have a gradation, a weight on citizen complaints, and a verbal abuse complaint is always investigated by internal affairs, not the Office of Professional Standards. No added layer of scrutiny. And if you add that verbal abuse provision to what else does not the Office of Professional Standards investigate? Almost nothing beyond use of deadly force. Corruption, that's IAD. Nepotism, that's internal affairs also. Verbal abuse, that's internal affairs.
And why
So-
is the verbal abuse piece significant?
Well, and I might be retired for 21 years, but my last 21 has been in and out of prisons with a board of directors that are retired and active, police, lawyers, etc. The verbal abuse training that I mentioned, we get taught what they call nonviolent techniques for control purposes. You can grab a lady's wrist. You don't smack a woman. No, you don't smack an 8-year-old. But you can squeeze their little fingers together tight enough to let them know you want them to walk with you. Mm-hmm. You with me so far?
Yeah.
All right. So verbal abuse has the harbinger for what the conversation is going to be like. You hear these kids saying, I want to get trained and not move wrong and all that. How you going to train a kid to be that restrictive about somebody who's supposed to be a professional, who's supposed to know how to use verbal language to preclude physical engagement? You with me so far? All right.
Did you want to say something?
Can I just jump in quickly with a question?
We'll get a microphone over to you.
In the context of the continuum, a question in the context of the continuum of force remark. I take the chief's point that officers respond differently to an 8-year-old, a 30-year-old, an 80-year-old. But what about adolescents as a special population? Mm-hmm. Are the police trained as they might be with with respect to interactions with the mentally ill in interactions with adolescents? So much of what we've been talking about has been, a dynamic between young people and the police with all sorts of identity issues, respect issues.
Right.
I mean, Howard's remark about, how you might hold the hand of an 8-year-old girl to sort of manage her, but not assault her, right? Anyway, I'd be very curious what...
Adolescence as a distinct period, apart from childhood.
Can I after you?
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think your psychiatrist yesterday or psychologist, she spoke to the challenge of that age group. Mm-hmm. That age group who are now, some kids are, and in this state we got all kind of legislative fights going on about convicting a kid for the rest of his life or to death in a mindset of an adolescent. I mean, come on. Either you care about the kid or you don't. The problem with black kids, and I don't try to speak for Latinos or poor whites or any of that, they can speak for themselves, but they're in a similar category. Black kids are dealt with for blackness. They don't even look at them as children anymore. And they're making rules based, and the police officer in the training academy, that military mindset. All right. We used to have a youth division. We don't even have a youth division anymore. Officers used to be trained to try to counsel kids to guide them away from the system. The mandate now is lock him up. Lock him up. We need the numbers. It's an economic engineer. And I mean, I'm not just speaking in general. I'm talking about track it. It's here. So that age group is a special group, Calvin, because they're in a transitional mode. They're trying to figure out what's real, who's fair. They say, well, I know Officer Friendly. That program didn't last long. They took the money away from it. Officer Friendly was a guy that, you could go and talk to him off the record. Yeah. We don't even know how many adolescents in our schools are missing school, going to court by themselves, because the people don't even know they got cases because they ain't asking them. So I'm saying the point is, at some point, if we don't make a specialization for how do we divide a community age-wise, gender-wise, race-wise, economic-wise, education-wise, if the police are not able to process that, they may find themselves doing psychology work without the training.
Yeah. Well, Chief
That's the
Castor,
problem we got right now.
What's your sense of adolescence as a distinct period of life and development, but one that might require a special focus and training?
Right, and all of our officers are trained in that well, and really anybody that's a parent, I have two 15-year-old kids, and clearly that their decision-making capability isn't the greatest, but all officers are aware of that as well. And there's also the trauma-informed care. That's something that is coming along too, that some of the adolescents that have been exposed to trauma, it has a physiological effect on the development of your brain. So if you would deal with an individual in one way, and then you deal with someone that has had repeated exposure to trauma, it's going to have two different effects. And so those are the types of things that we try to bring to our officers as well. But it is in the way that you develop those relationships with those young kids. And most of the time, it's getting them away, especially with the young men. You know, they feel like they're men, and they want to be the tough guy in front of everyone. But as soon as you get them away from the group, that's where you can deal with them, and that's where the breakthroughs and the breakdowns come.
I want to go back to this use of force protocol that was just talked about, and come back to you, Marq, on this, if you don't mind. Because I think you were getting to this. How do encounters between police and youth in particular, and youth of color especially, go wrong? How do they escalate? What's the dynamic where things move to a trajectory that is dangerous and perhaps even fatal?
There are many variables. I mean, let me just say this first off. I'm giving you a professional perspective, of course, based on my 20-something years in law enforcement. But, you have to understand something. Before I was a cop, and since being a cop, I've been a black man. So, and I understand, Chief, and I don't question the integrity of your department. I'm making generalizations about law enforcement because there is a pattern and practice across the nation that we need to deal with. But I'm speaking from a personal position. No one has to tell me about the relationship of youth and police because I remember it very well. Very well. I remember how I felt dealing with, talking to police, certain police, not all, certain police officers. I had my 20-year career, and since 2005 I've been out. But I have some tensions right now. There are certain police officers that I can see and go, oh, that got to be a problem. So the problem is, and I must harp on this and go back to it, is that when you expect little from those people who you pay, when you accept less, when you are slow in penalizing and punishing those who you've given this huge and tremendous amount of responsibility and authority to, you kind of coddle individuals who will stab you in the back and diminish the professional standard of your profession. If you don't deal swiftly and straightforwardly and have high expectations and very low tolerance for any deviation of the law, then you end up with individuals who wear a uniform, who have the title of police, who raised their right hand and swore to do all these things, who took many of the training and was exposed to all of these things, who has no business interacting with people on a regular basis, who has no business with having that authority in his hand, who has no business with carrying a firearm, who doesn't have a full understanding about use of force continuum. He may have forgotten when he left the classroom, who may be hooked, or clouded in, and who goes far. You have to recognize and understand people for who they are. And I'm going to say this one more time, and this is a clear example. We are in Chicago. I know Gary McCarthy very well. And I'm sure many of you have followed his history. So if you follow Gary, and I'm going to use him as an example since we're here.
Why not?
And I'm leaving this evening.
I'm a witness.
You think?
I'm still here. I'll call you.
I got the chief next to me.
Yeah, all right.
And I'm leaving this evening. But for example, if you follow and examine his career, his decisions, those things that he's been involved with, if you just follow them, you could Google them and find out more about them. Or you could ask some people here. And if you...
There's Gary McCarthy. He's the chief of police in the city of Chicago. Yes, ma'am, I'm helping.
If you take a poison from New York, and you take that poison and put it in New Jersey, and the same thing that happened in New York, increased unnecessary interactions, questionable behavior, corruption issues, violence, brutality, killing, and you say, okay, let's move that to New Jersey. And it happens in New Jersey, and then you move it from New Jersey to Chicago. Guess what's going to happen? Who's surprised? Who's shocked? Who's curious about it? Like, wow, we never thought. Of course, you could have predicted it. So until you decide that there is a breed of innovative, open-minded law enforcement professionals who can lead and guide you and who the community will learn to trust and connect to, until you tap on those people, you're going to end up with that same poison, Gary.
And I would like to say, in defense of Gary McCarthy, I have worked with him, and I think that he's a very innovative, very open-minded, very creative law enforcement
Please let
leader.
me respond to that.
And one of the things I want to say about the degradation in the relationships between police and juveniles, I would say that the majority of the time that is because the police officer reacts in the same way, where the police officer should always hold themselves above. In most of those situations, I would say that the officer is basically not forced, but meeting an attitude with an attitude, and that's where it goes down.
Very quickly, I don't want to make,
let me
then
quickly
I want to get to
respond.
the audience here. Yeah, please.
Because it's relevant, and like I said, I'm clear about who I'm dealing with. One is, I'm going to tell you this, and you tell me if I'm lying. Gary McCarthy is a one-trick pony. He knows stop and frisk, heavy-handed enforcement, and numbers-driven and quotas. That's what he does, and that's what he knows, because he's from that Comstat model. That's all he knows.
But
there's no there's no innovation in it. It's the same thing.
I want to get your reaction to this really quickly, because I do want to get more. We got a lot of people who are waiting to get in. He has also talked about this policing legitimacy theory that Richard referred to earlier as something that he wants to bring to Chicago and is trying to train. What's your reaction to that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You decentralize the community outreach group. You decentralize it. You say, because we want the individual districts to be, more in control of this. And then you defund it, in essence, eliminating its effectiveness. And you increase, and you consistently increase your unnecessary interactions with the civilian population, the black civilian population. You incarcerate at unbelievable levels. You explain or pretend to have success based on numbers of arrests. That's how you talk. When people say, well, how's the police department doing? Great. Our arrests are up 18%, our burglaries are that. I mean, you talk in that language. You don't actually speak to people. And you have a mass of people, and you have corruption and allegations of corruption going on, on a regular basis. Major, big, you don't communicate effectively. There's no openness and transparency. I mean, I don't look at that and go, that guy's good. I just don't.
Yeah. All right. Let me take. We have someone back here. What else? Who else do we have? Here and back up there. All right. Let's start here first. And my apologies for not getting to you.
Thank you all so much. My name is Eliza Solovier. I'm the executive director of First Defense Legal Aid. This is an organization that this brave, brilliant elder Howard Saffold started 20 years ago with other people. It's the only way that people actually access their right to counsel in police custody in Chicago. Is if right now a third party knows they were arrested, calls our hotline, and even in the middle of the night, we have an attorney on call for free to go to the station. So about this procedural justice lip service that we're getting from this administration, it's being kept at a very shallow level. While he's talking about, acknowledging that it's cornerstone to an anti-violence strategy to make sure that people can count on their rights being respected by police, their legal affairs office told me that only 302 people in the entire year of 2013 had a lawyer in the building at any point. Out of 143,398 arrests, that percentage is less than 1%. It's less than 5%. It's less than 0.25%. It's 0.211%, about 1 in 500 people. And this is something where everybody knows that we have the right to counsel when we're under arrest from Hollywood movies, if nothing else, right? So to have that point of disenfranchisement from thinking that the Constitution or human rights, are available to you is really drastic, really severe. And procedural justice and legitimacy is not supposed to be just, calling someone sir while you're violating their rights. It's supposed to actually be not getting in the way of them experiencing their rights. Even, within the system and how it's designed, it's always been to have an advocate there. And right now, 99.8% of people are alone with police and prosecutors.
That's a great
right?
point. Let me let the law professor, I mean, the impact implications of that kind of data.
I'm not sure if I heard it completely correctly, but if you're talking about people upon arrest as opposed to people who are going to be arraigned and in court?
I'm talking about everybody who's not free to leave police has the right to counsel in that moment.
No,
and they can be
no.
held
Not
by
necessarily.
Chicago, well, at least
They
in
don't.
Chicago, I don't know.
The Miranda right is they have a right not to be questioned without an attorney. But it's perfectly okay for the police to stop questioning you when you ask for an attorney. They don't have to go get you an attorney. They have to stop questioning you. That's the right.
What
Yeah,
this young lady
the
is
stat
off-
is so yes, sir.
Excuse me, Liza, because you're missing too much. I can't let you just sit there and talk. When you talk about why would an organization like First Defense even have to exist? They say, we just want to tell the guy, shut up. You got a right to shut up. That's all they're doing.
Right.
Not trying to represent him. But the police department throw them out of the station for trying to do that. So now, and I want to go back to the chief for 1 second. You don't get a chief of police in a city like Chicago without a mayor bringing them in. So don't ignore the chain of events. Nepotism and control. McCarthy, and I don't even know the man, he didn't have sense enough to ask me anything. And he's been here for 4 years. Maybe he knew better, because I've heard him lecture over here on this university campus, and had I been in the room, he wouldn't have got away with 90% of what he says. Out of reality, but his predecessor saw fit to get rid of specialized units because of the adverse impact they were having on police-community relations. The first thing this guy did was reinstitute specialized units. Now, I'm saying that maybe you know something I don't know. We started looking at CompStat. I mean, it's not a strange thing. It's just a term that nobody here knew except him. Right. He brought it in, and that broken window theory started out where we could have been preserving all of the stuff that you mentioned, CAPS. Chicago Alternative Policing Strategy used to really be a community organization effort for community relations. The police took it over. Richard Daley, M. Daley, named it Chicago's Alternative Policing Strategy, went all over the country talking about how good his strategy was. And you know what it was? It only worked in certain communities. Northwestern did a 10-year study on its effectiveness. It only worked in certain communities, and only a small percentage of police bought into it. So my point is, you know, we're talking about who cares about the community that's crying out. Is it the police chief? No, not if he can't. He couldn't bring much more than a secretary with him. He couldn't bring a plan, a strategy, a team of people to implement something comprehensive. They don't get hired like that. So if you want to talk about those 4 things that I mentioned in Chicago, you can get some lessons here. I don't put it in your kid, City Chief. You sound like an exception.
Let me take a question over here. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. You know, it's amazing to me how many of the police chiefs today are afraid to confront the central issue of racism. I'm in my 35th year as a law enforcement officer. I grew up here in Chicago in public housing, and the police officer is correct. You have to look back in terms of history to understand that these issues that we're facing are not new. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people want to push this stuff under the rug and say that based on 4 or 5 issues, and we don't want to paint everybody with the broad brush, which I thoroughly agree with that. But at some point, it's going to take a lot of courage from an administrative standpoint to take a stance against racism in the black community, to take a stance in terms of disciplining these police officers, in terms of moving organizations forward with simple remedies like customer service. You should be treating the public, the school district, the criminals, and everybody with a level of respect that's commensurate with how you would want to be treated. So therefore, my question would be, I have 2, is when are we going to start taking that courage, taking that step forward, and what are we doing proactively to train officers in with diversity in these neighborhoods? We know what the population of the police is. Law enforcement hasn't caught up with the demographics of a lot of these towns. I just promoted the first black sergeant in a town south of here that's 68% black according to the 2010 census.
So training and diversity in ranks, and what was your
I mean,
other question?
some real diversity,
Yeah.
Get out into the neighborhood, and understand the community, understand what the residents want, and they'll back you if you come in there in the right perspective.
Yeah.
Not heavy-handed. I don't think people, when they come in at law enforcement, say, well, I don't want a white officer to come into my neighborhood and police. They want someone to come in there with the right perspective and the respect that the people deserve in policing their communities.
Let's let our
I think I agree with you 100%, because in law enforcement, we have all said, everybody always says there's no bias, there's no prejudice. And the reality is that every human being has biases and prejudices. And we, all of our officers have gone through the fair and impartial policing, bias-based policing, in essence, to recognize those biases and those prejudices that you have, and not to allow them to affect the way that you are policing out in the community. And also, that's something that I get on a regular basis, is that, why don't you put African-American officers in African-American neighborhoods, Hispanic, and white? The reality is that we've found in the community, and actually has been backed up by research, is that the community wants somebody that they feel that understands and is gonna treat them with dignity and respect. And it really, to the community, doesn't matter who that individual is or what color their skin is. They're looking for a police officer that is gonna be effective and do the right thing by them. We also, I implemented what Chuck Ramsey did in DC, and we do the Holocaust training as well. Every one of my officers has been to the Holocaust Museum and learned the role that the police played in that event and how that can have an effect on diversity in a community as well.
And one more question.
Very quickly, sir, because I want to get to other folks here.
My question to the university is that this is a research institution, and what scientific research have you put forward to address some of these long-standing racial issues with respect to segregation, food deserts, no trauma centers, and so forth in the south suburbs?
Yeah. That's not a question that I am fully equipped to answer. I mean, I don't know to your extent, Richard, that you can talk about what's happening at the law school or perhaps the crime lab on some of these areas.
No, I can't. I mean, there's research going on all over the university about that involves these issues, but I'm not really in a good position to summarize them.
Yeah. We got a hand up here, and then we get I'm not sure where the next microphone is. Yes.
Okay, this is on. Hi. So I wanted to note that even when police do their jobs well, I think we can also think about what we consider to be crime and who does what counts as a crime in certain communities, or people look a certain way in other communities as if they do not. I saw a pretty funny tweet that said it's 420, a time where college campuses are lighting up and no one's going to prison for it and seeing minimum sentencing about it, right? So there's definitely a difference, and it's racially based, and it's systematically imposed on who we see as criminals and what activity we see to be criminalized. So when you're talking about implicit biases for individuals, that's still not addressing the systemic issues having to do with race, having to do with long-term history, with that in that category. So that's a starting point. Sorry, I had to respond to that. But I wanted to talk about this question of standards, and when we think about who we serve, and training. So from my understanding, CPD training is 6 months long, right? And we're talking about, if we are wanting to do community policing, there is a need to be more of a social service provider than a punishing agency. And I think, Chief, you spoke a little bit about the fact that your officers are trained in dealing with mentally ill patients or things of that nature. But I want to talk about to what degree, to what quality are these trainings? Are we talking in the 6-month period, how well can you be trained to deal with mentally ill patients, to learn to do tactical training, nonviolent use to control somebody, to deal with youth development? How can you squeeze all that into 6 months of training?
Got it.
And then how do you maintain that quality after officers
As you
leave
go
the
through your
training
career,
camp?
yeah, good questions.
Well,
What's your sense of
one of
the
the
realities
things,
of training?
Here's something I'd like to say about law enforcement. First of all, can everybody agree that there are certain individuals in our community that nobody wants to deal with? There are criminals in the community that people want out, right? Murderers, robbers, individuals like that. And officers are asked to remove those individuals, usually very dangerous individuals, out of the community, all the way down to being counselors and everything in between. So almost unrealistic, the total expectation in every one of those situations. One of the things, we recently had an individual that tried suicide by cop. You know, they point the gun at the police officer and say, "Kill me." And the police officer shot, but the individual, he just wounded him. And so now they're suing, saying that the officer didn't have enough training dealing with the mentally ill, which, you know, you point a gun at somebody and he talked to him for about 30 seconds. And somebody said, "How much crisis intervention do you get?" And I said, every day an officer comes to work, the entire shift is crisis intervention. So and every time there's a problem nationwide with law enforcement, the response is training, more training, more training, more training. And so we do train our officers, and we do it in as succinct a manner as we can, quite often through their computers, so that they have that resource to go back to. It's not just a one time and they're done. They can go to that resource. But that's always the answer: more training, more training. The officers have to be trained how to deal with people with drugs, mentally ill, how to be a social worker, how to understand the problems of adolescents, how to deal with elderly abuse, how to deal with murderers, how to deal with. So officers could be in training 24 hours a day for all of the situations that they deal with. But most of it is in their day-to-day activities. It is crisis intervention, everything an officer does.
Is there a piece whereby you reflect on your crisis intervention of the day, where you can experience something but never learn from it?
Yes, correct. We actually just started something like that with the Police Foundation with Jim Bierman, and it's called the Near Miss, and the firefighters have that. And it's something that police officers can submit to anonymously, and they can put in their instances that they had and what the reactions, what the results were, and everyone will be able to access that and learn from different situations nationwide.
All right, I'm going to take a
point before we go to
Yeah, very, very quickly. I want to get a question here, and here, and then we'll move to the next session. Quick
And then we have to be honest, there are some character traits and personality flaws that would make certain people untrainable. You know, so there are some people who don't absorb, who don't believe it, who will reject it and work, in the opposite direction of the training, no matter how fine the training may be. Because
We call that 1 year of experience, 30 years over.
right.
There
So
are those people.
you have those individuals, and sometimes they slip through the cracks and they make their way on and they aren't picked up. So I think a large part of training, the success of a training, is who's the person you're selecting to train. Mm-hmm. If
That's
you
very
start
important.
there, your training success
Very
goes up exponentially. It really does.
Yeah. Gary, one other.
Go ahead.
It seemed like when I think you finish, I just cut you off. So sorry.
You're telling me to finish.
Along the training aspect of this thing, this would be a question for, rhetorical question, really. The chief acknowledges, as I do, and I'm sure any experienced officer would, you become jaded after a while. Mm-hmm. And they used to have what we call in-service training and that thing of that nature. Every police department has an employee assistance program. Do you have one?
Yes, sir.
When you take how many guys you got on the street that's sick, they got a mental problem, they got a drug abuse problem, they got the highest domestic data in the world in terms of family problems. When do we go back and revisit how sick we get on this job and stop hiding it. And on the question of race, it's not that a black police can't shoot a black man in the head and it be non-racist. The system tolerates it based on the race of the victim. Don't matter who's doing it, just so you know.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
My name is Thomas Alexander Elliott. I don't have a question, but I have a statement. I grew up in Chicago. I've lived here my entire life, maybe 6 months I lived in Ohio.
No, actually, I can't.
I grew up with my grandmother, my grandfather, and my mom. My dad's been in and out of prison, spent the majority of his adult life in prison. And every time I walk down the street, I have a cop stop me. They never search me, but they always ask me how I am, how I'm doing, if I'm staying out of trouble. I don't consider that harassment, but my family does. I don't. I see it as them looking out for me. So I believe it depends on how you look at it. And that's all I got to say.
Can I ask you, young man, a question?
Yeah.
Did your dad communicate with you while he was incarcerated? And the only reason I'm asking the question is because people who are incarcerated that have family out here, and there are thousands of them in the black, I don't know about your community, but we're replete with families that have police and people in prison in the same family. The prison industry, as we were discussing it, is part of this equation. So that guy that's treating you nice, if you get the wrong one, he's the one that everybody else was complaining about, that he doesn't ask me how I'm doing. He's telling me what I'm doing. He's not asking me, am I up to something? He's telling me I look like somebody that was up to something. So there is a balanced, a two-sided discussion on the coin. I just wondered if your dad, as an incarcerated person, was involved in any way with anything back here in civilian life that enables you to be at least knowledgeable about why it's important for police to not arbitrarily put your age group, and you in that age group, in jeopardy by not being sensitive to the fact that you're in a transitional age group.
I think.
Maybe the question is a little too complicated. Is there a communication that lets you know that that person inside cares about you and he would like for you to be obedient to the law at every stretch of the imagination, but he also wants to advise you how not to end up where he is because somebody takes one thing that you do and make you pay for that the rest of your life?
Honestly, though, how I carry myself is because of my own. Everybody in my family is either a drug addict, an alcoholic, or a gang member. My father being a gang member, my uncle was murdered being a drug dealer and a gang member. I see them, and I don't want to be like them. I want to carry myself in a better way.
And he's saying a positive experience that he has with law enforcement, and you're trying to turn it into something.
And actually,
I was just trying to see if he had
I'm trying to become a police officer.
He should be a part of a lecturing session.
Good for you.
Well, real quick.
He's an
How do we
exception.
get, here's a question.
there is
How
a
do we
great-
get to that reality
Because
on a
that,
much broader scale
Good
for all
question.
communities?
and that's the challenge, because the interaction that he's having on a regular basis with police officers should be the norm. It should be, that's it.
And how do you know it's not?
How do I know it's not?
Did you see? Oh, you didn't play the tape this morning, right? She didn't see the tape.
Yeah.
The question is, how do I know it's not?
Do you see the police mistreating everyone in your neighborhood?
I see that they don't mistreat them. I see that they look out for them. They look out for me, because whenever they stop me, I've had few officers stop me and search me, but that's because I was out past curfew or something like that.
They should use you for a spokesman because they need help right now.
No, but that is to be, see, one thing, and there has to be a balance. I mean, it may not appear this way, Chief, but actually there is a balance and an appreciation that I have for the profession I engaged in for a period of time. I work with some fine individuals. I think I was a good cop. I don't know. But those type of interactions are commendable if you have a positive interaction. But I think what's happening in the black community is they're saying there aren't enough of those interactions, that common law right of inquiry. Hey, what's going on? How you doing? That is an anomaly. When I grew up, that was an anomaly in certain sections of Brooklyn where I was from. That's an anomaly. You got to go, hey, how you doing today? No, there was no officer friendly. There was an officer, he's all right, and there was an officer, stay away from. That was my reality. And that's not across the board and across the nation. Your department, from what you describe, it sounds as if there are some innovative techniques there. The question is, how do you make this national professional standard?
How do you move that into the dominant culture, the thing that everyone inside law enforcement comes in equipped to do and expected to do?
Right, and that is demanded of them from the people who pay the salaries, that kind of thing.
We're running along, so let me take this last question here, and then we'll continue the conversation as we move into accountability.
All right. Hello, my name is Dan. I want to ask you, Chief, you mentioned something about your officers have training for people with disabilities. Is that training or is that the officers in your particular district, or is that nationwide?
I don't know about nationwide. My officers do. I would assume nationwide that most departments do. The problem in law enforcement is that most agencies are very, very small agencies, the vast majority.
Yep. And my second question is that you stated, and it's a fact, that the prisons and jails are the nation's largest mental health service providers.
Yes.
Do you think that is something that should be the case for 20 years from now? Do you think that jails should be the mental health service providers?
No, I don't think that they should now, but there's going to have to be some very tough decisions that are made on the rights of the mentally ill and the treatment of the majority. I mean, I live in Florida, so our homeless population is huge because you've got year-round wonderful weather, and the vast majority have mental issues or addiction issues and those types of things, and there's just not the facility to treat, and so quite often it's the jails and the hospitals that deal with individuals that have mental issues, and it's very difficult. Even if we do get them onto the medication and into the facilities and get them into housing, there's always that they'll fall off and back out on the street. It's very difficult. I don't know what the answer to that is.
We're going to take a pause and a brief break. We're going to reassemble, and we're going to go deeper into many of the issues raised in this conversation, particularly around internal dynamics and accountability within police departments around the country. As we do, though, I want you to join me in thanking Howard Saffold, Chief Jane Castor, Marq Claxton, Richard McAdams for this conversation. Thank you very, very much. Appreciate it.